Hey guys, George's SoundTraxx here. This week I just got a new toy, the Broadway Limited FEF-3 number 844. Now, as some of you guys know, I have always modeled the Union Pacific Steam program, as I have here in this Challenger, the Athearn Challenger number 3985. Now, this is a model that I've taken and added in things like the class lights and the number board lights and the under walkway running lights, and just some other little details and so forth. Now, with this new model, this already has things like the class lights and the number boards illuminated, including a cab light, but we're going to go ahead and add a few extra lights into this model, and we're going to convert it and upgrade it to the Tsunami2. So we're going to walk you through step by step the process it takes to do this, but first let's take the locomotive and run it around the layout first to show you a before of what it sounds like. So here's some of the other sounds that it comes with. This is the oil injector, which I'm assuming is supposed to be like an oil fill atomizer, something along those lines. Then we have the water injector. So here's function 14 station sounds. Now we're going to go to yard radio chatter. Now we'll turn it off.
Permission to depart. Be advised, switches on the north end might be against you, so go
it
out,
plays the same phrase.
That's the radio.
Function 16 is maintenance radio chatter.
Emergency, emergency here on the A track.
So now we're going to turn it off.
If you guys need it, we'll make it work, over. Okay, that sounds good, thanks.
Now, for some reason or other, function 21 is lumber mill sound, so let's hear that.
Can I start that stuff on? They want to find out how many cars he's got first, okay? 4 tower.
Now that sound you're hearing there is, I'm guessing, supposed to be the air compressor. And there's a handful of other things on here, but
They want to find out how many cars he's got first. Okay. 4 tower.
like I said, we're going to hear a lot of the same phrases. So here's what we're going to do. Let's go ahead and take this upstairs. We're going to go to the workbench. We're going to start taking it apart and seeing what it's going to take to convert this and upgrade it to a Tsunami 2. Okay, so here we are at the workbench, and we're going to go ahead and take this locomotive apart. Now, the first thing, of course, is to separate the locomotive and tender. Between the two, there's a clip that comes down and into, and that's how the two parts are joined together. So we're going to simply lift the locomotive side up, and it's going to pull out. Now, there's a 8-wire harness right here. We're going to go ahead and grab a pair of tweezers, and we're going to try to pull that out. You want to be very careful that you're not pulling on the wires. This is actually enough. I can get it with my fingers. And again, be very careful because you don't want to pull those wires out of that plug. It can be very easy to do. So now you can see we've got our wires disconnected. We've got our locomotive and tender separated. So for the short term, as we do some exploratory, we're going to take the locomotive, we're going to set it aside for the time being, and we're going to try to figure out how to get into the tender. Now, one thing, it's always a good practice to have a piece of foam or something to rest your locomotives on, so that way any of the details or anything like that have a cushion so they're not immediately broken off. I also know there are foam cradles out there that you can buy. Those are fine as well. So we're going to go ahead and doing some exploratory here on the bottom side. I noticed there are 2 screws, one on either side of the truck here, the front pilot truck, and then there's 2 at the back. I'm going to guess that's what it takes to get this locomotive apart. I'm not seeing any of these pieces up here that are removable for any other access. So let's go ahead and remove these screws. Now you can always test, and you can see that it's starting to go. So these other 2 look like they are correct. So we're going to go ahead and undo these last 2 back here in the back. You get a different screwdriver that sits that, different Phillips to set in that a little better. And 3 and 4. So now look, you can see that, yes, the tender shell does actually come off. So now we can see that this is where our decoder lives. We have our speakers up here, and this will give us a good indication of what we're going to need to do. And then you can see that the 8 wires come up here and attach to the decoder. Now, I'm not sure this is where the decoder is going to live with the Tsunami 2 yet. I want to take the locomotive apart and see what our options are there. So now, before I grabbed the locomotive, I decided I wanted to experiment and find out what all these wires are coming out of the tender. So we have 2 individual wires wired to a plug, individual plugs, of course. We have a 2-pin connector here, and visually this one goes to the speaker. And then this is a 2-pin connector that you can see. There's a red wire going back and then a black wire going this way. So I wanted to see what these were. So what I did is I took my LED tester, and this is, again, it's a 9-volt battery. There's a 1,000 ohm resistor soldered into one of the leads of the connector, and then just some alligator clips. So what I did was I took some pins and gripped them in the alligator clips so I could touch the ends of the wires where they'd made it in the connector, just like that. So I was able to touch the brown one, and then this red one over here is the function common. So when I do these 2 together, that does take a little bit of finger coordination. So When I touch these two together here, the backlight lights up. There we go. And then this gray one, this little gray one here in this single connector, actually goes to the red light up on the back of the tender. So knowing this, I can free my tender shell completely, knowing that we're going to be gutting this anyway. I can grab my wire cutter. I can cut that red wire. Now my tender shell is free from the chassis, and we can work on those separately. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a small little medicine cup. I'm going to put the screws in here, and we're going to set these aside. So now we're going to turn our attention to the locomotive. Now this one here looks a little more tricky because I don't notice any screws down here immediately that might be locking the locomotive and tender, or the locomotive and the body shell together here on the front. There are two back here, so let's get those out and see what happens. Well, that just holds the injector in place, so it's probably not that one. So the next one is there's two screws right here on either side of this truck. So let's do those. Oh, we're almost there, but there is something holding the front together. And right up at the very front, you have to move this truck out of the way to get to it, but there's a screw at the very front under the smoke box. So let's get, this one's going to be fun to put back in place. Let's remove this one and see what happens. There's still something going on here, so let me take a look at it and I'll be right back. Okay, so we're in. And the secret was removing the elephant ears on the side. There were 3 screws, one here, and then one at top. And once those were removed, and that bottom screw that we did remove here was very important. And now we have everything accessible to our locomotive. Now, they've done some interesting things here. These are some spring-loaded pins that will touch circuitry up inside here to illuminate the various things. And then, of course, we have this big giant smoke unit up here, which is going to go away. We're going to take that out, and we're going to replace it with some cube speakers. And we should be able to fit our decoder right in this area in place of this, and then we'll remove this and wire everything direct. And then that way the 8 wires running back don't have to be the decoder, because we have more lights up here than we have wires back and forth between the locomotive and tender. So this will actually be really good. It'll be nice and easy, and should be a good conversion. So first off, we can go ahead and start moving this smoke unit out of the way, because like I said, personally, I'm not a big fan of these smoke units. We have 2 screws up here in the front, and this may lift the whole thing out as an assembly. There we go. So now our smoke unit is out completely. Now, if you look, we've got plenty of space up here, and we can easily fit 2 cube speakers in there, and that'll really help make that sound come out, and it'll also balance between the locomotive and tender for the sound. So the next thing is we have our wires coming from the locomotive side to the tender side, and we need to figure out what all these are. So we're going to go ahead and figure out which wires are for what purposes, and this circuit board will likely go away. Looking at, let me grab a I have a 21 pin decoder here. I'm just going to use for size. And oh yeah, that'll easily fit. So we can fit the 21 pin decoder with our 21 pin to JST 9-wire connector right there in place of all of this. Simplify the wiring, wire all these lights direct to that, and then the 8 wires between the locomotive and tender can be repurposed for 2 for track wire, you got left and right, 2 for the speakers, so we're going to have 8 speakers in this. We're going to have 2 up front here, 2 in the tender like we showed you inside the tender shell, and then we have 1 wire for function common, and then we'll have 2 wires, 1 for the red flashing emergency and 1 for the backup light. And that should allow us full access to be able to control all of the lights on this thing. So this is going to be a really exciting and easy conversion. So let's go ahead, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and try to figure out what each of these color wires are for, the purpose, and put together a wiring diagram so that way we know what we're working with and what we need to do. Okay guys, so wanted to share a couple of discoveries. When I removed this circuit board, this was the one, remember, that had the spring-loaded pins to match to the top. This was a ground wire, and that was soldered to this circuit board, which was located up next to the flywheel, and that's for the cam sensor. So they have a reed switch in here that a magnet comes and passes and tells the system how many times the cam is turned, which is fine. That's what we've done in previous models. We didn't use a reed switch. We used an optical sensor with our Blackstone models. But there was a ground here, and this ground was then soldered to this wire that you're seeing. So we take that out, and then there was another wire soldered here, and it says TR. And that's track right. So this wire here is actually my right track pickup. Then I started looking and saying, well, wait a minute, where's my left track pickup? Well, we have our multimeter. So I'm going to try to do this coordinated for the camera here. So you can see that when these two are conductive, you can see that you get a 0 ohm resistance. Well, what I found out was I'm touching the wheel here. Now I'm touching the frame, and look at that, guys. We've got the right track power is picked up through the frame. So when we're applying our track power to the decoder, when we mount the decoder up in here, this will be our right rail, and then we will take one of these screws that hold the circuit board in place and tie it into here, and then make sure our wire goes from there to the track. Now, one thing you can tell is on this original circuit board, you can see that these have metal rings around where the screws were holding it in place. That's because that's how the power is being transferred. And if you look closely, you can see there's actually a trace under here. So that was how it was making sure that this circuit board was getting the left rail track power. So now we have the extra wires. I've got the blue and the yellow wire here for our motor. And then now we get to figure out what the rest of these are. But like I said, some of these are going to be repurposed, so it's not really that big of a deal. So what we'll do is we're going to take our locomotive and our tender, and we can plug them in. And as we disconnect the wires here, we can use our continuity tester and our multimeter to determine which wire is which purpose here. And then as we build our model, we can make it do whatever we want it to do. And so that way we can take out their entire decoder here, remove it, and then basically we have all carte blanche to do whatever we'd like. Now, on this particular model, there's a couple of things I am going to do. Number one is, I'm sure you guys have all noticed, these models or these locomotives have the running lights that mount under the running board. So I'm going to need to do that. This is a metal chassis, so I will be drilling through the metal and at the various locations. So I do need to make sure I get the right locations. I'm also talking about and entertaining the idea of putting in a firebox light under here. Because these were oil fired, you could occasionally see the flicker coming through. So I'm thinking of adding that. So what I'm going to do now at this point, now that I've done most of my exploratory, I'm going to jot everything down, write it onto a piece of paper, figure out which functions are going to control which effects, and start planning my wiring. So really quick, just to show you, with all the circuit boards removed, you can see that there's a whole lot more simplified. We've got a bunch of wires, no doubt, but the good news is we can figure out what all these wires are. Also, one other thing I didn't think to mention was inside here we have these pins. Well, they're labeled what they are. So I can take the wire from my decoder and just solder directly to this pad. I don't need to worry about the spring loading. And then I can just make sure there's an excess length. So if I do need to remove it again, I can easily access it. So the good news is this is going to be a fun, easy, quick installation. And then I have all of my electronics that Broadway Limited has supplied, including this smoke unit, and all of that will be set aside and filed into the appropriate file. So again, I'm going to go back, start working on this, figure out which wires do what and which colors they correspond with over here, and make sure that I know how I want to wire this up. So this is where the planning stage is going to come in very important, because we're going to go down and we're going to set and make sure we know all of the lights that we're going to wire up. We're going to know which wires from the locomotive to tender connector are for what purpose, and so forth. So we're going to go ahead and plan that out. In my exploration, I wanted to double check these speakers and make sure they were wired in series, and I believe they're wired in parallel, which is one of the things Broadway does. But to get to it, this speaker assembly, which is actually like this, is mounted inside the body, but the only way you can get it out is through the end. And so there are actually two screws that hold this end in place right here. So we undid those screws and we pulled the wires out. And like I mentioned, these are our 3 wires for the red emergency and our tail light, and then the function common. So we can take that and set that aside, because that's not going to get touched. Then we get our assembly, and there's actually 4 screws holding this together. So once we take this apart, now there are actually 2 more screws holding the speakers in place. So we're going to take this screw out and this screw out. And now this plate, which is holding the speakers in place, will remove. And then we can find out that they're actually wired in parallel. So we're going to fix the wiring here, and then we'll just reassemble the speakers back and put them back in place. And then that way these 2 speakers will be in parallel to the 2 cube speakers that we're going to put up front. So these speakers, like I said, will mount right there. There's actually room for 2 of them right there in the front of the body. So this thing's going to sound fantastic, especially once we're done, and with the upgrade, of course, to Tsunami2. That alone goes a long way, but we're going to have all these big speakers and the 2 cube speakers up front. This thing's going to sound fantastic. So I'm going to finish working on this. We're going to rewire these in series. And again, remember, that goes from speaker to speaker. So what we're going to do is we're going to move some of these wires around to make sure that they're wired up in series. We're still going to use these same speaker wires because these are actually going to get connected to whichever 2 of these wires we end up assigning to the speaker. So I don't need to extend these very long. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and start working on that, and I'll be back with the full ended up wiring diagram. Okay, just to show you guys, what we did is we took the black wire, which was attached here, we disconnected it completely. Then we took the black wire that was running over to here and the red wire that was running over here. We removed the red wire completely. I don't remember where I put it, but it's gone completely. So what we did is we left the red wire where it was. We took this black wire and desoldered it from here and moved it to this terminal. So now this is just connected from here to here. And then we took the black wire from the connection and attached it to there. So now what we can do is we can take our wires, run them out the exit together, just like this. We'll run it under this foam. Sorry guys, I keep putting my hand in front of the camera here. I forget where the camera's at sometimes. All right, so now we're going to take our plate that holds these speakers in place. We're going to remount these screws. So now we have those wires going through. Now there's a little notch right here that the wires are supposed to exit from. So we can make sure to put those wires into that slot. That way we get that nice seal for the baffle all the way around. Okay, so now we've got these 4 screws. There we go. So now you can see that our speakers are actually rewired into series. So we're going to go ahead and slide this back into place. And then these 4 screws actually hold the speaker housing to the body. So we're going to line that up right there. Now this may be a little tricky to do for the camera, but we got to lift this up a little bit so that the screw catches. Okay. Now the screw's in, so now it should be a little easier. There we go. Now these wires, there was a slot at the top of that speaker baffle, and that's where the wires slide through. So we just need to line them up, slide them through, and we'll catch them on the other side. There's the third. So there's our 3 wires, and you can see the back of this now just fits into place just like that. And now we mount our last 2 screws. So that's all it takes to make these speakers now in series rather than parallel. So again, we have our wires here. As we figure out which wires on the tender will match up, we'll line that up. That's what I'm about to figure out. Wanted to do a couple of things like this before I actually start diagramming it, because one of the other things I'm going to end up having to do is to add the running lights. I may have to take this one apart a little further, so I don't want to get too far into the planning stage before I have to take the locomotive apart. The good news is the top part of this, the only thing that I'm going to do to this is this particular model, as part of their whistling steam, have a little hole right here in the smoke box that doesn't look right. So I'm going to fill that in with some putty, sand it down, and I'm going to paint that over. And then once it's weathered lightly with the exhaust stack, smoke cinders, whatever, coming out of here, you'll never notice that little hole there, but I do notice it and it bothers me. So anyway, the other thing I'm going to do, which is probably more of a personal thing, is I'm probably going to see if I can open these doors up. But this being a metal cab, it might be a little trickier than I expect. So I'll have to open this up and play with it and see what I find. But for now, I'm going to pause. I'm going to start planning this stuff out, and I'll be back and talk to you guys. Okay, so we're back here, and I did take the cab off. I'm going to work on some detail unrelated to this installation. I'm actually going to open the doors here in the back and add some interior cab details. So I'll be doing that, but that's not going to be put on video. Now, the last thing is I did find there was a screw up here, and then there was a screw on each side here, and I removed those. And that allows this whole frame around the walkway and everything to be lifted off. And that gives us perfect access to be able to drill in under here easily to add the hole to run the wires for the extra lights. Even back here, we're going to put the lights under the cab, and then we're going to route it under here, underneath behind the drawbar. And then right up the center, which is where the rest of these other wires come up. So it'll fit right in there. Don't have to drill any holes or anything there. and that is going to be a great addition. For me, these cab seats are going to go. I'm going to modify the interior of the cab a little bit. Again, that's going to be unrelated to this video. So we're going to set that aside. Now, the other thing is on this shell, or on this frame, I mean, you see there's a switch right here, on off, and that's what that does is this turns on and off the smoke unit. Well, since we've removed the smoke unit, we're going to put those cube speakers in its place. We can go ahead and undo these two screws. Oops, let me get a different, smaller Phillips head screwdriver here. There we go. We can just undo these screws here, and that switch will pull up and go out of its way. Just like that. And then we can take that and route the wires out from under here, which is this 2-pin black connector. And then under here, we can fill this in with a piece of styrene, glue it in place, and then paint over this so that you'll never see this ugly giant on-off lettering here, especially if you're doing low-profile shots. So we can clean that off, paint that, and get that out of the way. Now, one of the other things I'm going to do is I'm going to add a Firebox Flicker. So we're going to be drilling in under here somewhere. I haven't quite figured out exactly where, but you can see underneath this is all open. So it should be fairly easy to drill in under here, run some wires to a couple of LEDs hidden there that'll become a firebox. Now, the last thing is we have our connector here. Let's turn it around so you can see it and read it. So we have our connector. This is on the locomotive side, and this is where all these wires are going to be wired to. Now, what we're going to do is these have their labels as far as what they are, but we're not necessarily going to use them for those purposes. Remember, we have our 2 speakers back in the tender, and we have our 2 other lights back in the back as well that we're going to illuminate. So what we can do is we can just figure out which wires these are, attach them to the decoder with the appropriate terminals on the decoder or resistors as necessary, and then we can just make sure to match these up. So when we wire the connector on the tender side, you can see here the 8-wire connector here. When we wire them up, we can make sure that we match. Now, again, you don't have to follow this because, for example, since the decoder is going to be located in the locomotive, these motor terminals, you see motor plus and motor minus, will be repurposed for something else. So what we're going to do is we're going to write down these 8 terminals and we're going to mark what they are. Now on this one, track plus, track minus, we might as well go ahead and keep those. Not that it makes that big of a difference, but and then we have the common, the function common, and then the rest of them we can go through and make them do whatever we want them to do. So I'm going to go ahead and write down a diagram. We're going to show you what each of these 8 terminals are going to be used for, and then we'll match that up appropriately in the tender. Then we can button this guy up and get it done and out of the way. So then the only thing left on the locomotive side is to install the decoder. Okay, so once we are ready, as we showed you here, we've got this circuit board. Now each of these terminals are labeled, and we're not going to use them in the purpose as what they say. So what we're going to do is we're going to number them 1 through 8. And the way I'm going to wire this up is this first one, it says track plus. We're going to go ahead and use that to be consistent. The next one says motor, but the motor is going to be here and our decoder is going to be mounted up here in the body. So we're going to repurpose this motor terminal and we're going to make this the speaker plus. Now the next one says plus 3.3. We're going to go ahead and use that as our function common. That's going to go to the lights that are actually located in the tender. Next up, we have terminal number 4, and terminal number 4 says sensor, and we're just going to ignore that one for the time being. So that'll end up becoming just a loose unterminated wire on the inside for something possibly in the future, who knows. The next one says GND. That's for a ground, but like I said, the decoder is going to be up here, so we're going to repurpose that for the rear headlight, and that's going to be the rear headlight on the back of the tender. The next one is labeled serial, and I'm sure they use it for something, but we're going to repurpose this. This is going to become for our red emergency light, which is on the back rear of the tender up here. The next one here says motor minus. Well, we're going to go ahead and be consistent, and that's going to become our speaker for the other side of the speaker minus, and then of course our track power. So what we're going to do is we have our connections over here. I'm going to plug this in, and then I'm going to make sure which wires are for which purpose, and then I'm going to connect them to the appropriate wires. And that's how we're going to fix this up, and then we can button the tender up, put it away, and set it aside so we can finish up the wiring on the locomotive side. Now, one other thing I do want to show you is in our little break here, I know it's only been a few seconds for you guys watching, but I've actually taken some time to do some extra detailing work to the locomotive. Now, as they run in the summer, I took the windows out. So now one of the things I did was I actually took the time and drilled out the back of the cab so the cab doors are open here on the back. And then I also took some time to paint and detail the inside of the cab interior. So you can kind of see inside there that I've got some of the gauges painted, some of the levers and handles painted red. But what I've also done is I've replaced the cab door seats. There's a little platform here where the cab seats sit up, so they'll be more accurate right up against the cab, so when I put the figure in, you'll be able to see better. Plus, with the open window, we've also got some details. There's the reverser lever, or the Johnson bar, and then I've also got a separate brake stand, a separate speed recorder in there, and then on this side, there's actually a separate oil firing lever or control stand inside the cab. And you can see I did the same thing on the other side. Scratch built some doors and then just hung some chain around the door here and then put everything together. So that was a nice little project. And now we'll get back to the installation. So I'm going to go ahead and wire up the tender as we talked about. We just have to identify which of these wires are for which purpose, attach them to the inside here. So I'm going to go ahead and connect the wires to the other wires for the lights. So I'm going to connect my resistors for the LEDs. So this should be a fairly quick, easy installation, and like I said, be able to put the tender shell back on. So after I get a little bit of work done, I'll show you that finished project, and then we'll go ahead and put the tender shell on, and then we'll get finished up on the locomotive, because now the only thing left is to pretty much assemble it, since I've done some of the detail work and so forth that I wanted to do to the locomotive before I button it up. So we're going to go ahead and start working on this, and I'll get you some video clips of it, and we'll be back. Okay, so in this installation into the tender here, I've got my wires, and doing wire tracing, I found the pin number 1, which is going to be my track right pickup. Now coming up here in the tender, I have a gray and a black wire, and one of them is one rail, one of them is the other rail. So the question is, how do we know? So this is where we can get our multimeter. We're just going to quickly take this and we're going to set it to a continuity tester. So you can see that symbol right there under the 2000 is for continuity. And what it does is whenever we touch the leads together, you'll see that in the window, you'll see there's a 0 resistance or 0 ohm resistance. So what we're going to do is we're going to probe this. So what I've done is I've stripped the ends of each of these wires. So on the gray one, I'm just going to grab the gray wire and I'm going to touch the wheels. And there we go. So the gray wire inside the tender is for the right side. Now to confirm that, we'll test another wheel just to make sure. And sure enough, there we are. We have continuity between the right rail, or the right wheels, and the gray wire. So the gray wire is going to be the one going to our right track pickup, and then the black wire will become our left track pickup. So whenever you're testing for your installation, make sure you have a good multimeter around, because you can probe and test and find out what's going on. The same way you could probe the test at each of these pins here on the end and figure out which wire. What I'm doing here is I'm going to pull on the individual wire from here where I'm at the connector. So what I've got here is wire number 2, the second position, and I'll start pulling on it and see which wire starts to move. And in this case, we have this one. So this is wire number 2. So wire number 2 is going to become one of my speaker terminals. And you can see as you work your way through, and then once you're done, you can tuck this all up inside and pull it up in before we button the shell back on. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on soldering some of these other connections, and then we'll be back. Okay, now that I've got all my wires connected, I'll bring this connector underneath here pretty close, so it's just far enough that we can connect these two when we're done. But we've got our wires up, and all the connections are made, and there's no circuit board here, so we can just tuck these wires in. You can tape them in if you'd like. You can also use the heat shrink tubing method that we've talked about in the past. But this can now just kind of go in here like that. And the tender shell lines up. And then we're going to replace our 4 screws that we removed earlier in this particular installation. 2 towards the front, 2 towards the rear. And then we should be good to go. These ones reach in a little bit, so I'm going to use my tweezers and place the screw into the hole. And then we'll get our screwdriver and we'll tighten the screws in place. And there we have it. So now our tender is complete, assembled. We've got everything here ready to go. So now we can set that aside, and then we'll focus the rest of our work on the locomotive. Now the next step, we're going to add some lights to this thing. So let's get our body shell over here. And I've been using this block of wood to hold it up because we have these handrails up here. So I've been holding this to hold everything up to keep it from putting some pressure on here and potentially bending it. So go ahead and remove our body shell. Set that aside. Now that leaves us with the walkway frame. Now on this model, we're going to put 4 lights. We're going to put 2 up here, and we're going to put 2 towards the back. Now the cool thing is underneath here, there's going to be 2 lights, one under each side of the cab over here. But what we're going to do is we're going to route the wires through and under this so that the wires for the lights come up here, which is exactly where this bundle of wires comes up. So when I put this on the body here with everything in place, you can see how we have this bundle of wires coming up. So we're going to have the under the cab lights emanate up from here. We're going to be mounting our decoder right here. And so we're going to drill a couple of holes here in the side. So we can take this, move this out of the way. So the first thing we want to do is, because we're going to be routing the wires through here, it's going to be pretty tight clearances under here to make all these wires. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our small pieces of heat shrink tubing, and we can simply cut these up into small 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch pieces. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take some cyanoacrylate super glue. We're going to get an old business card. Now, for some of you guys have heard in the past, my prior profession was working at a Chevrolet dealership. So I have some of my old business cards that we can apply some glue to the bottom of, or to the back of, whichever. This way we can control how much glue we're going to apply. All right. So now what we can do, so we can take our piece of heat shrink tubing, we can either grip it with the tweezers like that, or depending on your angle, you may even be able to grip it on the inside like this to get a little bit better firm hold. But we're going to be putting it down into some stuff here, so I'm going to grip it on the side like this, and we're just going to gently dab it into the glue here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to place this right in under here. So this one is going to route the wires this way, We'll put another one here, and then we'll put another one underneath here next to each of these assemblies, and then we'll get our LEDs in place. So I'm going to go ahead, apply this second one. Let's get a good grip on it. There we go. Dab a little bit into the glue. And we'll go ahead and put that in there. Now these other ones, I'm actually going to use a little bit of a smaller piece. So I'm actually going to take one of these and cut it in half. So now I'm down to about 1/8 of an inch as far as the size. So you can see these are actually pretty small pieces of heat shrink tubing. But remember, we're just trying to hold the wires where we want them to go. We don't necessarily need it to be a structural support. So we'll set that one in there. Then this one is going to go on this side. Oops. That one was gripping onto my tweezers. So there's one of the downsides of trying to grip it from the side, is sometimes it can grab into the glue and cause a little bit of fit issues. Actually, I need to move that right there. That'll work. I'm going to move this other one too. There we go. So now we have, kind of hard to see from this angle. Let's move this light over a little better. So now you have, there's one piece of shrink tubing here right behind the inside of the this support for the cab, and then we have one right here, and then I'm going to put one more right there, and that's going to be the support, or the way the wires are actually going to come out of there. So there we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to route one LED over here, up and through, and route one LED under here, up and through, and then we're going to let this dry. And then I'm going to start measuring where I'm going to drill my holes here along the underside of the body here, so I can make sure to drill those holes for those walkway lights. So we're going to have 6 lights in total. You're going to have 1, 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we're going to talk about wiring those when we get to them, but we can put all 6 of those lights on a single output using some special wiring tricks. So we're going to go ahead and let that dry for a few minutes, and we'll be right back. Okay, so now that the shrink tubing here routing the wires for the under cab lights are done, now we have to drill our holes up here on the front of the underside of the boiler for our walkway lights. Now when you have the locomotive and everything lined up, refer to photographs like this one here from our friend at Railfan Models, Brian Wood, and you'll see where the lights are in relation to the cab and the boiler and so forth. So what you're going to do is take some pencil, and what I've done here, and it's kind of hard to see, but you can see there's a pencil line right here, and that's where my light is going to go in. There's another one right here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a hole into the through the underside of the boiler here, and that's where my wires are going to go for my light, and then I'm going to mount the light right here underneath the walkway. So what I've done is, just in a small pin vise here, I have my number 70 drill bit, and we can do this on the underside. Now you'll see I've also made a similar mark right here, carefully looking and paying attention to where it is, so that way it's in the same place on both sides. So what I can do is simply put my drill where my pen is, where my pencil mark is, and just slowly work my way through. Now yes, this is a metal boiler, and this is a piece of metal on the underside of the boiler here that we're drilling through. So you want to make sure that you have a fresh, good, clean, sharp drill bit to make sure that you get through the metal. And take it out and clean the flash away fairly regularly to make sure that you keep getting that fresh blade on the end of the drill bit through the metal. We're just going to do this at a slight angle because, again, we want to go under the walkway, and the walkway is kind of thick. It's not too bad. I mean, it's prototypically thick, but we don't want to go straight to the side because then we'll be drilling through the walkway. So we're going to do this at a slight angle, and then that way we're going to pop out right under here at the very bottom underneath the walkway, so our wires can be very hidden underneath everything. And again, it just takes a little bit of patience as you work and drill this out. And there we go. So now we have our hole, and I'll put the drill bit through so you can see where it comes out. You can see that it comes out right there underneath, right about where we want it, which is perfect. So now we have that. Now we'll do the other one. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of detail parts on the underside of this, so it's a lot harder to drill from this side. So your angle is going to be a little bit of a guess, but you can usually estimate it by looking at it very closely. Now the next one up here on the smoke box, there's a pencil mark right here. And again, we're going to do this. Now this piece is actually separate. If you look closely, there's a screw right here and it holds this separate piece. So if you don't feel comfortable drilling through it already attached, you can actually undo the screw and take this piece off and then drill it and then put it back. But it doesn't really take that long, as you can see. So what we're going to do is we're just going to drill here, but we can do a little bit more of a severe angle because it is not part of the walkway, and we are going to be drilling just through this to go under the walkway. So again, it just takes a little bit of patience and time. Just drill this out. And like I said, you always want to make sure you have good tools, and you want to have the ability to do it. If you're trying to recycle and use old tools, drill bits you've had for 100 years, this may take a little longer. I've got some drill bits that are I have some drill bits that are dull, that have a hard time getting through plastic sometimes. So you always want to try to get fresh ones. And drill bits are fairly inexpensive. You can get a set for about $7 to $10, or you can buy individual drills and replace them as they break or as they get worn out and used. That way you've always got fresh tools, because when you're trying to make things do, and there we go, when you're trying to make things do, you don't always get the cleanest holes. So as you can see, there's our hole right here. Right there is where we're at. So we're just about perfect. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill the holes on the other side here and get them in place, and then we'll come back when we're placing our LEDs. Okay, now we've got our LEDs ready to go. These are 0402 micro LEDs that are pre-wired. You can find them online in various different places. But we want to test each one to make sure it works. So we just have our battery tester. You can see that our LED is illuminating. And we're going to do that with each one that we have. So we can put that back. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our LED wire, and we need to thread it into the opening holes that we made. So again, this is where you want to pay attention to how you're going to route your wires based on the installation. So in this case, we're going to go under this pipe and under the walkways, between the pipe and the walkway here. So there we go. So now I'm through. So now what we want to do is we want to take the actual wire and feed it into the hole that we've made. And then we can come in the underside and pull it through. Now, my big clumsy hands just pulled the black wire back out, so we're going to go ahead and put that one back in through. And then let's put the black wire in. I will tell you guys that tweezers are going to be your best friend. They help you get all kinds of places that your big fingers and hands wouldn't normally get. Alright, there we go. So now we have our wires through, and we're just going to gently pull it through the hole. You want to try to be as even as possible. Now when we get to here, this is where the challenge is going to be, because we want our light bulb to hang down a little bit, just like it does on the real one. So we're going to take the wire and kind of kink it, but we want to make sure that the LED is facing outward. And then we're going to pull this through just a little bit more to where it just hides under there. And there's our placement right there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the LED is facing forward. This doesn't look like, to me, it's facing all the way forward. So now that we've got this in place, we're going to take a dab of CA and we're going to tack glue it in place. And what that's going to do is that's just going to help hold it in place. And then what we're going to do is where these wires are at, we're going to come over it with some microcrystal clear, and that'll allow us to not only hide it and hold it in place, but paint it as well, so that hides it better. This particular one here, you can see there's a little bit of distance. If you want to do some of the shrink tubing like we've done in the past and just cut a small piece to put in there, you can easily do that as well. It's not that big a deal. Once it's painted black, it'll be hard to see anyway, so not that big of an issue. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and tack glue this in place. So again, we're going to get our old business card and put a little dab of cyanacrylate on there. Now I like to use the gel because it takes a little longer to cure and gives you a little bit more of a working time, but you can use whichever you prefer. And then get a toothpick. Okay, now what we're going to do is grab a little bit of this. We're going to put a little bit, just a little dab on the end. Put this on the inside, and then we're going to use our tweezers to get the LED right where we want it. Okay, that looks about good right there. So now we're just going to let it dry. And then once this is cured, and remember this cyanacrylate only takes a minute or so to cure. So once that's dry, then we'll start threading the second one, and then we'll work our way to these first 4 at the front. And then I'll show you how we do the back one here in just a minute. Okay, now I've got all 4 of these lights installed. You can see the wires running under here. I did tack glue them in place with cyanacrylate. Like I said, we're going to go back and paint those here in just a second. But I want to move over to the under the cab lights. And on this side where the feed water system is, you'll actually see that this is all wide open. So this will be easy. We just glue the wire to the back side of here with the light sticking out just enough. But on the other side, we have this injector assembly. And you'll see that right here where we put the LED, there's a lot of stuff right here. So how do we fit our LED in here? Well, the good news is that this is actually held in place with a screw. So we can actually take our screwdriver and we're going to loosen that screw, and then we're just going to pick up the injector assembly and move it out of the way. Grab our screw and put it back in place. Now we can glue the LED right here where we need to, run it through our shrink tubing, and then when we're done, we'll put the injector assembly back in place where it belongs. Now the biggest challenge here is we want to make sure that we put this LED so that it's not going to interfere with putting this part back in place. So you want to make sure there's a little rivet right there, and we want to make sure the LED is sitting right here, and then that way it matches on both sides. We'll do the same thing on both sides. So again, we have our LED, and in this case we're going to route it through the shrink tubing first. So we'll go through the shrink tubing this way, and we're going to come through that one. You can kind of see how it's slowly working its way through. So we need to turn it over and then go through this last one. Just like that. So now we have our micro LED right there. We're going to go ahead and put a dab of glue behind it. We're going to glue it in place so it's right there. And then once that's set, then we can put our injector assembly back in place. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that in place, and then I'm going to do the other side, and I'll show you the finished results. Okay, now that we've got all the glue dried in place, and we have these bright red wires sticking out under here, so we're going to need to paint them. But before we do that, I'm also going to take these LEDs, and right now what we have is basically the raw LEDs sticking out. As a way to help mask them and make them look more like a bulb, we're going to take some microscale and the microcrystal clear. And again, we're going to put a little bit of this onto a business card here. There we go. And what we're going to do is just add a little dollop of that on top of each of these LEDs. So we're going to get a fresh toothpick out. And what that's going to do is it's going to try to help give us a little bit of a bulb-like look. Like I said, we're just trying to create a little bit of a bulb-like look so that it doesn't look just like the raw LED sticking down. There we go. And just simple. And as you can see from this side, oops, got a little bit on the pipe here. All right, so as you can see, it just looks like a little ball on the end of the LED. So instead of looking like the raw LED, we'll have it look a little bit more like a rounded light bulb. And then we got to do this to these back two as well. Now, one of the biggest challenges when you're working in this particular case is these lights have a lot of wires, and so you want to make sure that the wires are kind of protected but also out of the way. So it becomes a little bit of a challenge. And as you can see, I've already reinstalled the injector plate here, which I probably shouldn't have, because now I'm getting my microcrystal clear all over the injector as well. And the good thing about the microcrystal clear is it takes a little while to dry, so you can always come back, put a little bit more on there if you don't like the look. But overall, you can see how we're making these look more like the light bulbs. So, all right, and with that, the next thing, once these dry, I'm going to go ahead and paint these wires to make them black so that they're hidden a little bit more. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll get back, and then we'll address the firebox lights on the locomotives. Okay, now that we've got all that painted, you can see we've got it painted, we've got it hidden, and so especially from the side you won't be able to see it, and you can see how these lights look pretty good here along the side. So we're going to take this and set this aside, because the next part we need to do is we need to install our firebox light. So in this chassis here, one thing I noticed is when we put the walkways in place, there's a small little gap right here, about 1/8 of an inch wide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take two LEDs, one on each side, and just hang it just over the back right there. And you can see this right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shine it to where it shines down. And it'll be a firebox light. And so every so often as it's running, you'll see that firebox flicker. And it'll give the illusion of an oil fire locomotive. So what we're going to do now, we've got to prep this model. So in order to do that, we're going to take our pieces of heat shrink tubing, and again we're going to be routing wires and LEDs where we want. So we can take some heat shrink tubing and cut it into smaller pieces. And what we can do is we can glue this in place. So again, let's get our business card over here. There's my, we're going to put a little bit of cyanoacrylate down. And again, we're just trying to tack these in place. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take pair of tweezers. I'm going to hold this in place. Now, one thing to note is right here is the screws that mount the body shell to the chassis. So we want to make sure that we put these in such a location that they're not going to interfere with this mounting. So I'm putting it just a little behind the opening so that it'll allow my LED to route, and I'm going to glue it right here in place, just barely hanging over the edge. And then the wires will run through this piece of shrink tubing. And then we're going to run it up here, and we're going to run it into this bundle, and then over the motor, and then to the decoder that's going to sit right about here. So we can do that on the other side as well. I'll put a little glue. We're going to basically mount this in the same place. And there we go. We don't need these other two pieces. All right. Now, while that's drying, and before we mount our LEDs in place, I do want to address this. This bundle of wires coming up. As you know, we've got the plugs. The good news is we can just cut the plugs out. We're not going to be using them. So those plugs are gone. But the other thing, and more important, is all these wires go underneath this piece of tape. Well, we can remove the piece of tape, and we can take our cab lights and these firebox lights and route them under the tape and put the tape back in place. Or we could put several things of heat shrink tubing along here, glued to the top, and slide everything through. I haven't decided which way I'm going to go on that yet. I keep going back and forth, but I do want to tuck the wires underneath this. So tell you what, let's go ahead and just peel this piece of tape up, and we can always put it back. All right. So we can put that piece of tape back, and as you see, here's all our wires. And like I said, we're going to tuck all these back under here. Now, another thing while these are drying, as we talked about in the previous, when we were putting the tender together, the wire that's labeled for the sensor, this is a wire that we don't use. So you can see track right, and we have the motor allegedly, and that, like I said, we've repurposed that. Then we have the plus 3.3 coming in here. Now these are all labeled as well, so we need to find the one that's labeled for the sensor, which looks like it might be this one right here. Looks like this is a brown wire. Now to confirm that, again, we're going to take our multimeter, we're going to set it to our continuity tester, and we're going to touch this sensor lead here, and we're going to touch the base of this, and that obviously is not the wire. Alright, so it is this gray wire right here, and that's conductive to the sensor. So this gray wire here we can actually remove. So let's get the rest of our wires, we're going to pull them into place. Let's get this gray wire, I'm going to pull this out. Okay, now take our multimeter, we're going to put it back up on the shelf until the next time we need it. And we're going to turn on our soldering iron, and we're going to move that wire out of the way. And again, this is just what we're doing here while we're waiting for these, for the glue on these pieces of heat shrink tubing here and here to dry. And once those dry, then we can glue our LED in place, and then we'll route the wires up here with the rest of these. Now, like I said, if you have another purpose for this wire, or if you're doing a different model and you want to use this same type of thing, you don't have to remove this. I'm just doing it to clean up the wires here so that way we have a pretty clean scenario. So now I got my soldering iron. I'm just going to reach in here really quickly. Just touch this one lead, and there we go. Now the gray wire's out, and I can save that for another project. Another thing I want to show you is up here on the original installation. Right here, we removed a circuit board. Now, this is going to be a great place because we want to try to shield to make sure there's no wires or anything that potentially get caught in this motor drive. So what I did was I actually took the printed circuit board and cut and sanded all the parts off of it and filed it down, painted it black. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pull these screws out, back out again, and we're going to put this little circuit board back in place. Now, this circuit board was used to for the reed switch, and there's a magnet embedded in the flywheel, and you can see it right here. And this magnet, you can kind of see how that's rotating, but this magnet would pass by the reed switch, and that would trigger the decoder that Broadway has put in there to create a chuff. But since we're removing all of that, like I said, this circuit board here, this is going to act as nothing more than just a shield to prevent the wires from getting tangled up in the drive line. So we'll go ahead and put that back in place. Alright, now with that in place, now when we run these wires over, you'll see that they're going to have a nice shield over there to protect it from the drive line, so you won't have to worry about anything getting caught in the drive line in there. The last thing I want to point out is if you look closely down in here, there's a wire with an eyelet and it's attached to a screw, and this here comes up as a black wire. Well, this is all conductive to the, in this case, the right side of the locomotive and the wheels. This other half of the frame is conductive to the left side. Well, but you notice there's no screws or wires coming up. And why is that? Well, because power is transferred through the frame. So when we put our walkway in place, there's going to be screws that hold it in place, and that's going to transfer the power from here now to that walkway. And then if we look at the original circuit board, you'll see that there's a metal eyelet around here on all three corners of this circuit board, and this is where the track power was then conducted to this circuit board so that the track power on the locomotive side was picked up. So we'll want to replace these. When we mount the screws down on the upper level here, we're going to put a wire underneath the screw to make sure that we're picking up our track power. Ideally, you'll want to have a little eyelet that you can put the wire and solder it to. You can fabricate one out of brass, or you can just tin the end of the wire and kind of wrap it around the screw and then tighten it down. That should be good enough. And so in preparation, one thing I did do was I created a dummy circuit board, and the reason I did this was because this is what we're going to mount the decoder onto, and the current keeper is going to sit underneath of this, and so it just helps free it up. So this will sit in here like this, and the advantage is that now these three screws, I can attach one or two of these to the left rail track pickup and attach it to the decoder. So we're going to be consistent here, but that's going to come in after I set this walkway on, once these flywheels are in place, or once these firebox lights are in place. So, all right, so it looks like we're done. This should have been dried enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my LED and we're going to feed it through the heat shrink tubing. And I'm going to turn this a little bit so you can see this. So this is literally just going to sit right there. And so it's just going to give a little bit of a flash every so often, so that way you get a little bit of an illusion of the firebox. And I'm going to put one on each side. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our glue again. And it looks like I still have some left here that hasn't fully cured. So I'm just going to take this, we're going to put a little dab right there, and we're going to take the wire and we're going to tuck it into the glue and hold it in place for a few seconds. And you want to make sure to kind of roll your toothpick a little bit to make sure it doesn't get stuck in the glue, because what can happen if you let your toothpick dry in the glue with it, when you pull the toothpick out, it pulls the wire out too, and then you're back to square one. Another thing you can do is just have a flat tip of a screwdriver and kind of rotate back and forth. Like I said, all we're doing is just trying to help make sure that this LED just barely hangs over the edge. Because again, we're just trying to create the illusion of a firebox flicker. And since there's a little gap right there, once you put the next part of the frame on, this is a perfect place without having to drill any holes or anything in here. So there we go. Now you can see it's kind of holding in place a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to get some Insta-Set here. Put a little drop of the glue curant. This is the accelerator for Acrylite. And we're good. Now we're in place. Now we can do the other side. So we're just going to grab our wire with our tweezers here. We're going to feed it through the heat shrink tubing. Here it comes out the other side. So again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to get a little bit of this glue over here. We're just going to put a little dab right there. And we're going to mount our LED down into the glue here. This LED twisted on me a little bit. So let's get the tweezers and fix this. These aren't always the easiest things in the world to fit, especially with flexible wire. So that's the challenge as every one of these LED installations is you want to have the flexible wire because it gives you the flexibility, to mount wherever you want it. But you also have the flexibility that now makes it a little bit more tough to route the wires where you want them in a pre-made way. Now the other challenge is if you have the opposite. So if you have some stiff wire, then you run the risk of breaking the wire if you're in tight locations. So you want to have something that's kind of a combination of both. Now this looks like this is holding. So let's grab our accelerator before this comes up. Looks like it's starting to try to come up on me a little bit. Let's put a little dab more over it. There we go. Get a drop of the accelerator. There we go. And we'll let that sit. All right, so now what we can do is while we're waiting, let's take a look. We'll get our battery. Again, we're just going to test the LED. Attach the black lead to the black wire or the negative side, the red wire to the positive side, and you can see we have a light. So if you put something like a Firebox Flicker kind of like that, that's going to be a pretty cool lighting effect, I think. Especially just underneath it there, just enough to give the illusion of an oil fire. So we'll let that cure for a little bit, and then once that's dry, then we can put our frame back on here and we can start getting this thing ready for wiring up. Okay guys, I want to share a couple of discoveries with you. Number one is there's only 6 wires coming off of this circuit board, and so after removing that sensor wire, there's 8 terminals. So after removing that sensor terminal or that sensor wire, there's only 6 wires coming off of the circuit board. So I was trying to figure out, and of course the plus 3.3 is the one that doesn't have anything going to it. So I was trying to find out where the wire is and where the terminal is, and there's nowhere on this circuit board that the 3.3 connects to. So the good news is I don't have to worry about another power lead or something coming in here that potentially can fight with one of my 3.3 volt regulated. But the other thing is that now I have to attach a wire to this pin and run it up. Now, knowing this in advance, you could, because we've already buttoned up the tender, I can't change this wiring diagram, so I have to maintain this plus 3.3. But knowing this in hindsight, when you guys do yours, you can ignore the 3.3 terminal and just use this sensor now as your V plus for your lights, and then that way you don't have to remove the gray wires. So, but anyway, we'll adapt. We'll make it work. And the other thing is, I do want to point out there's there's a yellow and a blue wire coming off the motor, and obviously those don't jive with normal NMRA colors. So in testing, I found that the yellow wire is the V negative and the blue wire is the V positive. So the yellow wire will go to the gray on our 9-wire harness, and the blue wire will go to the orange on our 9-wire harness. So we're about ready to button this thing up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solder a wire here to this plus 3.3. We're going to route it up and through here, and then we're going to take these wires coming off of these LEDs and route them up through there and tape all that down so we can get our walkway on and start getting in with the decoder installation, because that's pretty much all that's left. Now we've got our firebox lights, we've got our walkway lights, and all the lights that are inside the model already. So it's literally a matter of connecting wires at this point. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I will be back. Okay, guys. Now, don't be afraid to change your plans on the way through a process. And here's what I'm talking about. I went ahead and I did add that 3.3 wire. I used the gray wire we just removed. But then I started looking at the wires, and we have 2 gray wires. Now we have 2 red wires. We have 2 brown wires. And once they go through the tape, how am I supposed to find out which wire is which? So I decided to go ahead and do the tubing. And what the tubing does, it allows me to separate and organize the wires. So when you go down here, our track leads, we have a red wire here and a gray wire over here. So I took the 2 red and gray track wires and put them through a tube together, so that on this side I can quickly identify which one are my track leads and connect them to the appropriate wires. Now I did the same thing with our speaker wires. We have a red wire and a brown wire, and now I took those 2 and ran them through, so now I'll know which ones are my speaker wires. So rather than having a bundle of wires coming through here, now I can quickly identify which red wires and which gray wires are for what purpose. Now I also did the same thing for my motor leads. You can see here the LED wires coming through. These are the ones for the firebox. And then I also have an extra one here, because if you remember, the ones under the cab have wires too. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slide those through here and make sure that they're nice and clean, and so that way we have a nice professional clean looking installation. And all of this will button together. It'll look great, and we'll have this ready to go. So again, don't be afraid to change what you're doing. If you take your time, you can find out and find the best way to do these things, and that way you can get the best, cleanest installation that you can come up with. So with that, we have our frame coming over here. Let's get these wires out of the way. There we go. And now we need to feed these other wires up and through. So we have these wires coming out. We're going to go ahead and pull those aside with a spare pair of tweezers so we can hold them separate. So now we're going to take our other tweezers here. We're going to pull all these wires up and through. Now we need to find our track lead wire, which is right here. Pull that up and through. Now that just fits right back down, and you can see I've got all the wires that I need right here attached and easily accessible. So now with my cab wires, I can take them and feed them through the extra tube. All right, now we're in business. Now we have our wires coming out the end. Now you can see how nice and clean and professional looking that installation is, even though we've added so many more wires. So now the good part is now we can attach our screws. And these are the screws that we took out a while back that help hold this in place. So we're going to have the screw up there and then 2 screws back here. There we go. Now we have our frame in place. Now you can see these lights line up exactly where we want them. And then we have our cab lights back here, our cab under cab lights. Everything's nice and clean. Now this front part is going to be cleaned up here in just a minute, but before we address that, we're going to mount our speakers in place. Now to do that, we're going to go ahead and take our 2 cube speakers. We're going to cut a piece of styrene plastic. We're going to glue them to the bottom here, and then we're just going to mount them right there, nice and clean, right inside the smoke box area there. And then we're going to run the wires so that way when we put our decoder in, we can run the wires exactly where we need to go. So the first thing I need to do is to get a styrene strip. And it doesn't need to be anything fancy. It can just be a scrap strip that you have laying around from a previous project or something like that. Let's see, is that going to be too wide? Let's go with something a little thinner. There we go. That's going to be about perfect, and we can shorten that too. This is just styrene, so we can glue these together with styrene cement. Let's go ahead and get our applicator. We're going to go ahead and put that up towards the front, centered as close as we can. Just put a little dab of cement right on there. Alright, we're going to let that sit for a minute. We can do this on the underside as well. Looks like I'm still slightly off center. There we go. So now we'll go ahead and add a little bit more styrene cement here to the sides. And there we go. Now we'll let that cure for a minute or two. And then I'm going to put the other one in, and I'll come back when we're wiring these speakers in place. Okay, so now that we've glued both of these to our styrene strip, you can see we have a nice little speaker box there. So the cool thing is now we can simply mount it to the floor in here in the smoke box. And we're just going to use some double-sided foam tape. Going to cut a thin strip off of here. You guys have used this stuff before. And this piece looks like it's going to be a little short, so we're going to need to double up. So we'll go ahead and put this piece in place. And the problem is, the reason we have to double up is because this screw head right here, I clear it this way. I clear this boss, but this screw head is in the way, so we have to put a second layer on top here. So mount our second layer of double stick foam tape to help get us up over that. Okay guys, as what happens occasionally when we're shooting video by ourselves, so don't necessarily pay attention to the front of the camera. And unfortunately, a lot of the steps that you see done here have happened that on a live camera that I thought. And so what we're going to do is quickly summarize what unfortunately was lost in video. First off is I mounted the cube speakers here. You've got the double stick tape down, and I wired these cubes in series. So you take the card that comes with it and you can identify your plus and your minus. So you can see your minus lead here is the short one because this speaker's oriented this way. Now when I put the 2 speakers back to back, it actually puts opposite poles next to each other. So I took a small piece of wire, tinned it, and then soldered it as a bridge to go from one speaker to the next, and then wired the positive speaker wire here. So when I attach it to the decoder, this will be my positive lead, this will be the negative lead, and then we'll just match that up to the leads that are inside the tender. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you'll notice some of these wires are separated a little bit differently. Now when I'm wiring up these lights here, these are 3 LEDs on each side for a total of 6. And if we wire them up just all in parallel, the decoder is not going to be able to power them because you've got six LEDs drawing 20 milliamps each, and therefore now we're exceeding the 100 milliamps that the decoder is rated for. So what we have to do is we have to wire them in series. So what I've done is these first two LEDs on the front here, I've taken the negative leads and pulled them aside here, and these are going to go to our function output that we wire these lights to. Now the next one is the red from this front LED is now going to be wired to the black of the second LED, and then the second LED's red wire is going to be wired to the black wire of the third LED, which is below our cab. Now the last thing is we have our function common positively that will then go back to the decoder, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Now in the essence of clarity, I'm not going to do this because there's going to be a whole lot of working and I'll have my hands in the way, but I'm going to solder these two wires together, these two wires together, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, so that all I'm going to end up with is essentially I'm going to have two wires, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to wire each side in series, and then I'm going to parallel the three sets of LEDs, and that will draw our current draw for these LEDs down below 100 milliamps. Now, of course, the three LEDs sharing power are going to be a little bit dimmer because they're sharing power, but that's great because we're going to make them dim anyway because they're going to be under walkway lights, and so they're not bright like headlights. And that's one of the advantages of the Tsunami2. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to wire this up on both sides. We're going to tuck these wires in underneath here and put them away, and that way they're nice and clean, and we just have the two wires on the front and the two wires off the back that will be wired to the decoder, and then we can start wiring in our decoder in place. So I'm going to get that started and I'll be right back. Okay, off camera, as I told you, I wired these lights in series. So we have the two wires coming off of the front for the under the walkway lights and under the cab lights. This is attached to a 3.3K resistor, so a 3,300 ohm resistor. Now, one of the other things is all the function commons that were coming up from our Firebox lights and our under the cab lights, which are also our step lights or under the walkway lights here. I went ahead and tied all these function commons together as one wire so that it would simplify coming into the decoder here. And then I did take the two wires from the Firebox and attached them to their own resistor, so they're ready to go. So now the next step is we're actually going to start installing the decoder and the current keeper. So first thing is I'm going to grab my current keeper, and one thing I wanted to let you know is I did trim off some of the excess shrink tubing around here because I'm trying to make sure this is as small as possible, because in this particular one it kind of flared out a little bit, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount this right down here in the bottom of the boiler here, just like that. Now as I told you, we have a replacement circuit board that is the same as this, but instead it's a piece of styrene. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this to mount this down into place, so that you can see what I'm doing. So this is just going to screw in right here, and it's going to screw in back here into these blocks, and there we go. Now it's going to mount the current keeper underneath of it to kind of hold it in place. So now we have our two wires coming up from the current keeper, we have our wires for the front, we have our speaker, and we have everything else. So we're ready to mount the decoder. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our 21 pin adapter, which is part number 810159, and this is this adapter harness, and this is what we're going to wire into the model. And then we're going to use a standard 9-wire harness to plug in, and this is where we're going to make all of our connections, just like that. So we're going to be doing this, but one thing I want to show you on how to use this thing. First of all, 21-pin decoder plugs in right there, but you see all these solder pads along here. What are they for? Well, the underside, you'll notice that they're all labeled. So you have a V+, you have your current keeper plus and minus terminals here, you have your FX5, 6, 7, and 8 here, and then your speaker wires go right there. So what we're going to do is we're going to mount this with some double stick foam tape right there, and then we're going to start wiring everything in place, and we're going to make our solder connections right here, and then we're going to plug in our decoder. And then we're going to be pretty much done with this. And this is getting exciting because we're almost done. So this is what we'll do. So let's get our double stick foam tape. We're going to cut a small piece like this. That's just going to fit right underneath of there, just like that. Now I recommend you document these. If you don't, there's a wiring diagram on our website at SoundTraxx.com for the current keeper connector. So you'll also want to place this in such a way so the 21-pin decoder has enough room to mount. These wires have enough room to go to where they need to go, and everything is wired up accordingly. So this is actually pretty good. So now we're going to start making our connections. So the first up, we have our speaker terminals, which ended up being on this side. So that's going to be perfect. We're just going to take our speaker wires and solder them right there. And this will go underneath the 21 pins. So we're going to run these wires down below. We're going to mount the current keeper on this side. And then we're going to attach those FX6, 7, and 8 there. And I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to get these started, and we'll make some of these connections, and I'll show you where we're at. Okay, so what I've done so far is following the diagram here. As I mentioned, it's labeled on the bottom of the adapter as well, but you can use this. So we have it sitting in here like this. So we have our speaker plus and our speaker minus. So what I've done is I've taken the wires from the tender, extended them, and tied them into the purple wires coming from our cube speakers, and attached them to the speaker plus and the speaker minus. Then we have our current keeper plus and minus here. The current keeper plus and minus wires are there and in place. And then the only other thing I've done is I've taken the function commons coming from our extra lights that we've added to the chassis, and then the blue function common, which was the gray wire that we attached to the 3.3, that is now going to the function common here on the 21P adapter. So now I have left these 4 lighting functions, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the FX8, FX7, FX6, and FX5. So what we're going to do is we're going to attach those accordingly. Okay, so using these lighting outputs, based on diagram and what I've chosen to assign to what lights, FX8 is going to be our rear red emergency light. And so that actually is going to be one of these wires up here. I believe it is the brown wire. Now, the FX7 is going to be our running lights, or our under the walkway lights, which is this resistor right here. So we'll attach that to the FX7 terminal. FX6 is going to be Firebox, so we're going to attach this wire here to the FX6, and then FX5 is going to be our cab light. Now the rest of these then are coming off the front here. So we have our FX3 and 4, which is going to be our class and our number boards. We have our headlight and backup light, and then of course we have our function common again here. So the function common connects all of them, so it doesn't matter which way. And we're going to show you how we're going to attach the wires to the inside of the boiler here in just a few minutes. And then of course our motor, orange and gray, are going to go to the blue and the yellow wire respectively. So I'm going to go ahead and make some more of these solder adjustments here. So I'm going to go ahead and make some more of these solder connections here, and I'll be back in a little bit to show you where we're at. Okay guys, so now I have our red emergency light, which I had to extend some of these wires. So the red emergency light got extended by a yellow wire. And then the firebox got extended by an orange wire. And I routed these underneath here, underneath this plate, in addition where the current keeper lives. Because the current keeper wasn't taking up the whole space, so I ran some wires underneath there to save some space on top. So now the only thing left is the FX5 for our cab light, and then we're going to attach the rest of these wires. So first thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these wires out of the way. I'm going to attach the orange and gray to these, which are our motor leads, and then our track power leads are right here. This is the backup light. I'm going to go ahead and attach those, show you what it looks like, and then we'll attach the body shell and we'll get ready to button her up. So I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, I've got my blue wire attached to the orange wire. I've got my yellow wire attached to the gray wire. I've connected the red track wire to the black lead, which is also the black lead that came up off of the frame that I showed you earlier, which is on the right side. Now remember, the left side is conductive to the entire frame. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take this screw right here. I'm going to undo it. I'm going to wrap a wire around it and tighten it down. Now remember, the screw is touching the frame, so the screw will conduct the electricity through the plastic. Now remember also, our base locomotive to tender connector was also touching the right frame, or the left frame, I'm sorry. So that should be enough to make sure we have track power going to our decoder. So here's my red track lead. We're going to attach it to this gray, and then a third wire that's going to go down and touch this screw right here. These are going to be the wires that are going up to our locomotive, the top body shell, and then we have to attach the one extra wire for the cab. So I'm going to go ahead and make this joint, and we'll come back after we tape all this down, show you what it looks like, and then we'll get ready to install the cab the body shell, the boiler shell. So we're getting really close. It's really exciting. And let me go make these connections and I'll be right back. All right, we've got all the wires attached here from our back of the cab here going through. I've taken some Kapton tape, wrapped it around to tuck these in to make sure these are all nice and compact here. You got some loose wires here. And then as you can see, here's our red wire that attaches to the frame screw. So now we have two screws that are carrying frame power. Now the rest of these wires we can just tuck around underneath here just to make sure that they're all nice and secured and out of the way. Now the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to solder a wire here for the FX5, and that's going to go up for our cab light. And then we have our function common, we have our headlight wire, and then we have our number boards and the class light wires right there. Now these are going to get attached to the underside. We're going to put a resistor in line with each of these to make sure that they match up with the respective terminal. So I'm going to attach a wire here, and the reason I'm going to do that is because what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen these screws up here a little bit, and I'm going to wrap some tape around here as a added insurance policy to make sure all these solder joints are nice and protected, and then that way we can press our decoder down in place, test fit, and we should be good to go. So I'm going to do that off camera, and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so now I've used an orange wire for the FX5, and I've tied it into this bundle. We're about to attach the body. So we're going to go ahead and fit our decoder in place. Again, when you're setting your 21 pin, you want to make sure that the black plastic header is on the top. That way you can get it lined up properly and set in there. So there we go. We've got our decoder set. Tuck these wires back away. So I'm just going to remove this piece of tape. We're just going to tape it down this way. There we go. All right, so we're in the home stretch here. So we're going to take our model, our decoder, and our body, and we're going to set it over here. Now, on the underside here, you can see where we have the, let's turn it over so we can read it. So we have the GND, which is our function common. You have the cab light, number boards, Mars, but there is no Mars light on this particular model, so we can leave that off for the time being. And then FL is our front light. So what we're going to do is we're going to solder the wires directly to these pads, and then we're going to solder resistor in these leads, and then we're going to attach all this together and tuck it all up inside. So as you can see, we've got plenty of space in here. Everything seems to fit well. Of course, it's hard to say with those right there. So let's take our leads here, and just to show you exactly what we're going to do. So this, as I mentioned, it goes to the ground, which is our function common. We're going to measure this out, cut our wire. We're going to strip the insulation. We're going to tin the end of the wire. Sorry, I know my hand kind of gets in the way sometimes. All right. So we're going to go ahead and put a little solder on the end, and we're just going to tin the end of the wire right there, just like that. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to bend this flat. We're going to trim this a little shorter because we don't need quite as much space there. Now we're going to put a little dab of flux right there on the ground pad inside the body. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to take this wire and we're going to solder it to the GND terminal right there. Oops, just like this. So now we have a hard connection between the ground terminal and our function common, which again is our blue wire. Now I'm going to go ahead and add these extra wires, and I'm going to splice the wires here and add the resistors in to each of these wires, and we're going to attach them to the appropriate terminals. So as I said, there's 4 lights. You have your headlight, which is the white wire. We have the marker lights, which I'm going to wire to FX3, which is our green wire. The number boards, which are FX4, and then the cab light, which is going to be FX5. So I'm going to go ahead and attach all these connections, add my resistors, and I'll show you what it looks like right before we button it up. Okay guys, we got all our solder joints made. You can see up in here. So we just need to make sure we tuck all these wires up inside the body shell here. And then we just need to make sure it all fits. And let's see where we got some issues here. Now we just need to put our screws back in. The trickiest one's going to be this one up in the front because we had to reach in quite a ways to get it. So grab our screws here. Okay, we're putting this screw here in behind the under the cab here first. We'll start there. Now let's see if we can get this one in place. This front one's going to be a little bit of a pain because we have to reach through so much up front. Okay, I believe we're in. All right. Now we just do the third one over here. And there we go. So now we have the locomotive done. Everything's put together. Now we're going to go ahead and plug in the harness. There we go. All right, there she is. Let's take her for a test spin. Well, as always happens, it never seems to fail that we find something that is backwards. I went and test run this, and what I found out was that this terminal labeled GND, apparently I didn't realize I was attaching the negative lead to the LEDs to this GND terminal. And so by wiring the blue wire to the GND, that means all of my polarity and my LEDs are backwards. So now we have to go a little bit further and search, because we still have a ground here, which means all of these negative leads are all separated. So this is going to take a little bit more than a 5-minute project. So I'm going to take this thing apart, figure it out, and I'll come back to you here in a little bit. Okay, well, what I found out is we've got our smoke box off. We have these small little printed circuit boards up here, and they decided to go the proprietary route, and they have a function common negative, which means all of this has to come apart and we have to replace the LEDs up here. I'm not very happy, because I had thought I had found that these were working under traditional way. So what I have to do is get this apart, get in here and get these circuit boards out and replace them with LEDs. So it appears there's a couple of posts here, and then probably some posts up here that I have to get apart. I'm going to work on these, hopefully get them apart. Let's see here. This one looks like it's starting to come. There it goes. So yeah, we have to redo all these LEDs. Let's see. There we go. So we get this out. And what's going to happen is when I do the negative as the function common, which is in the middle, you see that these lights light up. And I do the same thing to the other side. And it lights up. So I have to replace all the lights, all the LEDs on this thing. Like I said, not real happy, but it's not the end of the world. It's easy to be done. The good news is it's just these front lights. Cab light already has its own independent wire plug, so that I just cut off and wire it up appropriately. So, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my micro LEDs. I'm going to mount one up inside the number board here, and then I'm going to get the other one, and you can see the class light lens right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue my LED to the back of that, and then when we glue this casting back over in place, it'll shield all that up, and then we can just have the bare wire sticking out of the bottom, and they'll run to the appropriate place. So yeah, it's a little frustrating. You guys have seen me add LEDs before to models where we glue the LED in place, and then once the LED is glued in place, we paint some silver on it and so forth. Well, this has a shield behind it, so we don't need to do that. So I'm just going to take some LEDs, I'm going to glue them to the appropriate place. We're going to test them again, make sure, and then we're going to redo this. But this is a little frustrating because then we also have to mount our headlight LED right here into this as well. And like I said, again, it's not the end of the world, but it is a little frustrating in the fact that we have to do that. I'm One thing that I just noticed happened was a small piece of what appears to be clear lens fiber optic just fell out. Well, the good news is our class light is small enough that we can probably just stick it up into the body, up into there. So we'll see what this does on the other side, if this piece comes out, or if it was just loose on the one. But that'll make it a little easier too if that piece is out. So little setback, but not, like I said, not the end of the world. But you guys knowing this ahead of time now will be able to be better equipped and ready to handle what's coming your way with this model. So anyway, I'm going to go mount some LEDs and I'll be back. Okay, just wanted to give you guys a little update. I've taken the LEDs and glued them into the light casting so you can see the two wires coming out of the light casting. And then once this is fully cured, I'm going to take some of the microcrystal clear, fill in this hole where this is, and then paint it to make sure that the light doesn't escape, because our class lights are right below it. Now, as you can see here, I have the headlight LED glued in place, and then I have the two marker light LEDs glued in place, and each of these are about to get the daubs of crystal clear once it cures. Once those are cured, we'll paint them black, we'll glue the number boards back in place, and then we can mount it up to the front and route our wires. In this case, before I put the before I run the wires up to the front, I did glue on the inside of the body shell here some heat shrink tubing that will act as conduits. And again, we'll go ahead and tie all the function commons together and attach them to this wire, and then each of these wires will get to their respective purpose. So all is not lost. It's just a little bit of a setback. It's a little frustrating that anybody nowadays is doing a function common negative on their LEDs, especially with as much as everybody uses DCC, which is a function common. But this is not an unusual thing that these companies do to try to make sure that you have to use their stuff. They try to make it more inconvenient for using another brand like SoundTraxx products. So anyway, I'm going to finish letting this cure, and I'll show you the back of the smoke box assembly once it's finished. On the inside of the smoke box door here, you can see I have all these wires for the LEDs coming out, and I joined all the function commons together, and then I have the wires coming out for the class lights and the number boards, and then the wire for the headlight. Now inside the body shell here, I've glued some heat shrink tubing up on the inside, again for wire routing, and that's what I've got up here. So I've got a secondary tier inside, so we can simply just grab our wire, run it through the tubing inside here, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the other ones off camera. And then we've got the two wires for our cab light, and we're just going to tie them into the wires there. So once we're done threading this wire through, we can pull all these wires out. And the smoke box plate will just, again, snap into place. Oops. One of the wires got caught around the handrail here. There we go. And it fits in there just like that. Now you can put some glue or something on there. I'm just going to leave it because it looks pretty flush and it looks like it's a good fit all the way around. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. You can test the LEDs again here if you'd like. I've got them separated by number boards, class lights, and then headlight and function common, which are on these two. And then, like I said, the wires coming here, the brown wires are V+, the black wires are V- for the cab light. So now it's a matter of just attaching them to the appropriate wires and tucking all that up inside of there and putting the body shell back on. So I'll get back to you. I'll come back once these wires are soldered, and they're going to go the same way. Our blue function common, of course. Our white's our headlight. Green is our number boards. I'm sorry, green is our class lights. Brown is our number boards. And then the orange wire here is going to be for the cab light interior. So, like I said, the interesting thing here is I apparently didn't pay attention when I was lighting those to test them, and I thought it was a common function V+, so I thought it was going to be good. Apparently, these guys have taken a page out of the MTH where everything's opposite. Again, why, I don't know, but we're stuck with this, and the good news is it's fixable. It's just a little bit of a setback in what was supposed to be an almost done model. So the good news is this will be done here fairly short order, and pretty excited to get it on the track and take it for a test spin. So with that, I'm going to make my solder connections, and I'll be back. Okay, so here we are. I've got all my solder joints made, and so we're ready to put the shell on. One thing you can do to reduce the excess wires is you can twist this around a couple of times and tighten that up, and then you can use it as a solid piece to tuck up in as one assembly, just like that. Now when I'm putting this in, I got to make sure to line up these front handrails. And there we go. Now it sits right on there. So now we're going to replace these 3 screws that we took out. There's 2 back here behind the cab. Or under the cab, I should say. There's one. All right, we have number 2. Now, as I mentioned, this front one's a little tricky because it's way up in there. So we're going to try to grip this and place it in, and there we go. Alrighty. There we go. Alright, now that's in place. Now we can go take it for a test run. Normally I would do that, but I'm pretty confident that everything's working. So I'm going to put the elephant ears back on. So you have to line up the holes. And remember, there's 3 screws on each one of these ears. There we go. All right, so now we're going to get these other ones. Now these are going to be a little tricky because they're inside the ear here. Okay. That one's in. And then one more. All right, so now there's one on in place. We're going to get our other side. All right, well, I'm going to continue messing with this, and we're going to take it down and take it for a test run, so I'll be back. All right, let's apply power and see what it sounds like. We can hear that big steam, big boy air compressor working. Let's listen to the whistle. Bell. Let's get the headlight on. Now let's check out the other lights. We'll turn on our class lights. We have our number boards. We have our cab interior light, which may be difficult to see in that angle. Next we have our truck and our under the walkway lights. And other lights we have is the red emergency light, so when we throw it into emergency, the red light on the back will come on. And then, as I mentioned, we also did light up the firebox. Now, one thing I did So guys, that'll be a short roundup for this model. We'll be talking a little bit more in depth on how we did the lights and so forth in a future video. Right now we just wanted to show you the installation process and what is involved so that you can upgrade your Broadway Limited FEF-3 so that you can also have the correct sounds rather than the generic sounds that the Broadway Limited offer. And then also show you that you can actually go through and do the work of these models. It just takes a little bit of time and effort. So with that, guys, thanks for watching. We'll come back to you with more of a setup video in a future installment.